And hello, test. Yes, hello. Hello, friends. I'm excited to talk to you today about Blazor. It is a lot of fun, and hooray. So there's people sitting on the ground. Are there empty seats, though? I think there are some empty seats, but, do what you want to do. Yeah, I work for Microsoft. You can reach me on the Twitters or in the emails. Or say hi, come up and talk to me afterwards. Love to talk more about this. So we're going to be talking about, first of all, why my clicker is not working. There it is. That was a short conversation. So let's talk about Blazor. There are right now a lot of you can develop in a lot of languages for a lot of different things. Part of my talk yesterday about .NET, today and tomorrow's, mentioning that, there are more than one .NET language. And how about on the web? On the web, there's really pretty much just one language that's supported, and that's JavaScript. And honestly, I love JavaScript. I'm going to start now by talking about, Blazor is going to show you alternatives to JavaScript, but I want to make it clear, I love JavaScript. I love how JavaScript has evolved with browsers and really made the web this amazing platform because it is so dynamic, because it is so adaptive, and people have built all kinds of crazy things on JavaScript. There's Atwood's law, whatever can be, any software will be written in JavaScript, basically, right? And it is pretty much true. But is JavaScript the only language for the web? Does it have to always be the only language for the web? And the answer now is no, because there's this thing called WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is not from Microsoft. WebAssembly is something that it's a community standard. It is supported in all major browsers, and it runs all different kinds of languages. Any language that can compile to WebAssembly will run, that binary can run in the browser, which is crazy. So as an example here, let's pop over. I'm mostly doing this to test if I'm switching browsers correctly, or switching screen. No, so I'm not, and I forget what I need to do here. Here, is that working? Okay. I need to do this. Sorry. Duplicate. Good. Thank you. I needed to get that out of the way. I always forget it. So here, this is WebAssembly.studio. As an example here, there's all these different kinds of templates, and so here I can do hello world in C, right? Because who doesn't want to write C everywhere, right? So, and you can do this in the browser. This is, I think this is from Mozilla, but here, if you prefer C, knock yourself out, right? There's other ones for Rust and other things. So the crazy folks at Microsoft started by Steve Sanderson, started looking at, could we get .NET running in the browser? Anything that can compile to WebAssembly can run in the browser. So he actually started with a project called .NET Anywhere, which was written in C. It was just some random thing kind of floating out on GitHub. He got it to work, got this C code to compile and work and run in WebAssembly. And it was just kind of an experiment. And people saw it and were like, this is great. Do more. So this is actually something that has been continued to be an experiment, but the ASP.NET team has devoted time to building this out further. This is now .NET running in WebAssembly, running in the browser. Why would you do that? Well, let me start by saying, why wouldn't you do that? By giving a short bit of history. I was a Silverlight developer for a while, back when Silverlight was a thing. Yeah, and thank you, sir. I'll pay you afterwards. I actually loved the time that I spent building with Silverlight because this was, what was this? The late, like 2007, 8, 9. Back then, browsers didn't do a lot of stuff that they do now. They didn't play video well. They didn't, or at all. It was a mess. They didn't have support for things like vector graphics. They didn't have support for async. They didn't have support for all kinds of different things. And, just modern language development features. And at the time, Silverlight was a great way to start developing looking forward to the future. So I got to work on some really cool projects. I worked on one that did streaming millions of hours for a basketball tournament in the United States, the March Madness basketball tournament. And it was a lot of fun. Some of the developers I worked with back in the Silverlight days said, this is great. I'm never going to write JavaScript again. I hate HTML. I hate CSS. And I always argued with them because I said, you know, I actually really like HTML and CSS, and I wish browsers could do this stuff without me having to install a Silverlight plugin, right? I don't want to have to wait for browsers to support this code I'm deploying and then working with customers and putting up things, hey, you need to install the latest Silverlight and all that kind of stuff. So this is now a time where, so don't do Blazor, don't do WebAssembly because you hate HTML, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. I don't think that's a good reason. I think it's a better reason is this kind of stuff, but I just want to make sure that's really clear. I'm not in the camp of getting away from the web, right? So what are some things? Well, first of all, stable, mature, productive. If you are a developer that is regularly writing .NET code, you know, in the tool of your choice, Visual Studio Code, but maybe Visual Studio, you know, you're used to your favorite NuGet packages, you're in the zone when you're writing .NET code. Stay in that, and you can write your front-end interactions. So fast, scalable, reliable, modern languages. So JavaScript continues to evolve, but there are some incredible features coming out for C#. And again, if you are a skilled, you know, C# developer, being able to use that without, you know, having to look up for the 10,000th time how this works in JavaScript is kind of nice, right? And then finally, you know, like these first-rate tools. So this is, again, like Visual Studio JavaScript. So I'm going to talk through, I'm going to show you some stuff with Blazor, and then I'm going to kind of circle back to this on the end. It's kind of like, why would you use this, and you know, how to dig in. The place to find out about Blazor is at blazor.net. And so that is, not that. That is this. I'm actually super proud. I did the design for this page. Never hire me to design your pages ever, but the team was like, hey, we need to put up this site. John, you want to do some? And so this is just Bootstrap, and yes, it's wonderful. But there's actually some really good content on this. So if you go into the Get Started, there's a tutorial that'll walk you through, potentially walk you through. So I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, okay. So there is, you know, how to get started. Getting started is super easy. So it's basically installing a V6, which is a Visual Studio extension, and it takes, you know, like half a minute. And then once you've done that, you can do File, New Project, and create Blazor projects. So I highly recommend doing this. It won't break your computer, I promise. Well, probably won't break your computer. No, it actually won't break your computer. And so it's really easy to get started. Go through this Get Started tutorial, and then there's plenty of other stuff in depth to it for the docs. So if I don't cover something, remember blazor.net, and you can always get to that. Cool. So Blazor is experimental at this point. I'm gonna talk to you later about some parts that actually have graduated from the experimental phase. But here's the stuff to know about it. So it's you know, the full stack .NET WebAssembly. There is no thing that you need to install in the browser. Any modern browser is going to work with it, including mobile, which is cool. So, and I'm not sure, we joke about what the name is, but yeah, it's Blazor. That's just what it is. So, too late to change it now. I actually like it. Here's some of the crazy stuff about it. When I first started poking around at it, I assumed that what was happening was Blazor was like compiling all my C# code, and it was transpiling it into WASM files, WASM files, and it was sending those all down to the browser. What's actually kind of crazy is, okay, so what really happens when you run your application, it's HTML and JavaScript comes down. There's a reference, there's a loader and a reference to a mono.wasm file. That mono.wasm file is actually a .NET virtual machine. So it handles all your .NET stuff, like garbage collection and strings and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and then all your application, your DLLs get pulled down. So if you've referenced a NuGet package, the DLLs in that NuGet package also come down to the client, right? So that's an important thing to kind of understand. And I think actually it's a good thing. At first I was like, what? But then thinking more about it, I want my DLLs to run the same as I've expected them to. I don't want to depend on some transpiling to maybe make it work, right? I don't want garbage collection and those sorts of things to work in a weird way. So that's actually what's going on. So we'll take a look at this in a sec. Again, this is where to get it. Steps 1, 2, 3. Hopefully you already have the .NET Core SDK installed. You can install the CLI templates if you want. You can do basically either or of these top two. Even if you do the Visual Studio one, I recommend install the Blazor CLI templates because there's a few kind of additional ones that won't show up in Visual Studio, and so doing the command line, you'll get a little bit extra. So let's do it. Enough slides. So I'm going to go to, let's do Visual Studio. We'll go to this one. So I like running previews and the normal version. That's a nice thing of Visual Studios. You can do side by side, in case you don't do that. OK, so File New, ASP.NET Core. So I've got a few options here under Blazor. I've got just plain Blazor, which is what I'm going to show you first. Then I've got another one, which is ASP.NET Core hosted. So that's the server is actually, you've got a back-end server running ASP.NET Core and a front-end running Blazor. Then we've got server-side Blazor, which is a new crazy thing, and I will also show you that. So starting with just plain Blazor. So if you've done ASP.NET Core development with Razor pages, this is going to look totally familiar. So I've got a program and a startup, and these are your standard, kind of program and startup that you'll see there. We've got pages, and pages has CS/HTML files. And if we look at those, it's Razor, right? So the Razor is the ASP.NET language that allows you to process, so you have HTML and you have C# markup in it. And so you can do things like bind to strings, and you can run all kinds of C# code in there. Okay. So let's just run this. I'm going to switch this over. Let me show this in Chrome. So this is my Hello World Blazor app. Building, running, exciting. OK. So this sample application has a few things. And you'll see, first of all, it's loading. I ran that as debug, and I think it's a larger install. It's also doing this to scare me. This morning, I had some early previews. I had .NET Core 2.2 and 3.0 early, like an alpha preview. And none of my Blazor applications were running. And that was fun. But so it did run here. So here I've got this page that says Hello World, and it also has this survey thing. So let's pop over here. So there's Hello World, yeah, that's standard HTML. The survey prompt is interesting, though. That's actually shared survey prompt.cshtml, right? So this is using a tag helper to pull that in. Okay, so that's neat. That's a simple thing. Then there's two others a little bit more complex. Here's a counter, and when I click count, it counts. I recently showed Blazor at a just as part of a larger .NET thing. It was at VS Live San Diego, and somebody wrote it up in a magazine, and they quoted me as, "This is really cool." And then he showed a counter app, and I think they were kind of poking me, but I had fun. I should print that out and put it on the refrigerator, right? So here's one more that is a weather forecast. So let's look at how these work. So this counter, all right, so we have standard HTML at the top. We have that at current count, which is binding. And it's binding to this current count equals 0 down at the bottom in functions. And then we have this onClick, and the onClick, because of that at there, is wiring it to a Razor or to a Blazor function, and it's calling this increment count. So it's just count plus plus. So now notice here there is not a call to count plus plus, I notify property changed or update the UI or anything. It's basically, it is watching, and when the value changes, the binding automatically updates. So that is something that is not immediately obvious. It's easy to kind of miss that. And I started working on some other things, and I'm like, wait a minute, why is this changing or why is this not changing? So you have to realize it's just automatically going to update those bindings for you. So that's kind of neat. Now look at this fetch data. So in this case, fetch data is making a call back to the server. It's making a call to fetch some data. And in this case, the data is, it's just grabbing it from, it's using HTTP client, and it's pulling down a JSON file. So there, it's using HTTP client to request a JSON file from the server. So if we look over here, here's my weather.json. Okay, so there's some interesting things we can learn from this. First of all, it is using the standard Razor inject. So we're injecting an HTTP client. And then down here, when I make my call, if you're used to using HTTP client with .NET, you're actually using that same standard kind of syntax. So await HTTP client, get JSON async. All right? And to understand, in this case, what we're doing is we're actually, Razor is using Blazor, excuse me, it's wrapping the browser's HTTP client to make that request. So then, one other thing that's interesting here is we are doing standard Razor binding. So first, let me show you the model class down here. So we have a weather forecast, and this uses things like a date time, right? So I'm using my C# date time. That is one thing that I've run into with JavaScript, is because it's all dynamic and not like strongly typed. Sometimes from the C# point of view, I wish it was more. And so here we do have that strongly typed, right? So then up here, first of all, there's this if forecast equals null loading. Again, there's no okay, loaded is complete, now do this. It's just an if statement. And so it's evaluated. Once forecast is not null, then it's going to get to this part. Here we're doing a standard Razor for each. We're for eaching over those forecasts and binding them. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's what's happening here. Let's take one other look onto the client, and we will do this. So I'm going to refresh the page. And first of all, I should have gone to network. Okay. So we've got the original, fetch data is the page. Then you'll see this call to blazor.webassembly.js. And then also there's a call to bootstrap. So again, remember, this is standard markup for the front end. So we are not building things with XAML or anything. This is standard HTML JavaScript. So sure, we can use bootstrap. So then there's blazor.boot.json, which loads mono.js, which loads mono.wasm. So mono.wasm is the only WebAssembly file. And then this loads all its friends. So these are DLLs, right? So here's all my dependencies. MS core lib, right? System.net.http, all that stuff. And there's my application there. So if we look down here, this was, if I clear, let's see, if I do control F5, So you'll see we are right under a megabyte. Is that big? Yeah, it's a little bit big, but compared to a lot of other front-end frameworks, it's not necessarily that big. When we're under a megabyte, a lot of time I get more than that in images downloaded, right? And sometimes even compressed JavaScript is pretty big. So, and they're continuing to work on this using things like the IO linking and tree shaking and other computer science terms I don't really understand, but I'm going to say because other people say them and they sound smart. And so we're doing that to continue to shrink down the download size, right? So that's the entire thing. That was that. Candy Crush keeps popping up. I don't know why. Okay, so that was our front end Blazor. So that is all, those are all static files. So that's important. So for instance, if I went to, I'll go here. Here's an example running on GitHub pages. So GitHub pages, this is just static files hosted up in the GitHubs. And what they did was they just, threw these files up here. This is an early version. It loads slower, but it does eventually load. And this is just Blazor. So the point is, you could put this on any server. There's actually demos out there of people hosting Blazor applications running on, let me see if I have it cached in this browser. There's examples, too, of people running this on out of Azure storage. So directly from storage with no kind of compute on the back end, right? So we'll just leave that running there. It's in its happy place. Cool. Let me see if let's go now and look. Well, there it is. Okay. So, and here's my counter. I love counters. Yay. Okay. So now let's look at the back end side to this. So here we have done just static files, host anywhere, and it's doing all the, it's basically stuff that I could have written in JavaScript is running in C# code instead, right? So, but a lot of the time, the part of the point of running these front-end applications is to pair them with a back-end API. So let's do that. I'm going to do file new because I love that, and so here it's ASP.NET Core hosted. Now you don't have to host it with ASP.NET Core because they're static files. It could be PHP on the back end. I don't care. I mean, don't write PHP, but you could, right? And so here, this is an example. I'm going to set that as startup, if it isn't already. Yep, okay. And you're going to see, I'll spoil it, it's going to look the exact same. It's the counter, it's the survey, and it's the weather data. The one thing that's different, though, is the weather is actually calling to the server. So we have an ASP.NET Core API, and it's making these calls back to that ASP.NET Core API. Did you notice, by the way, when I click on fetch data, there's a real quick thing where it says loading, right? So that was that thing where the data it's making the call, and then it's getting the data. So here, we can look at the controller, and we've got, it's basically doing a random thing, and it's creating random weather data every time. Based on a lot of the time, I think that's how they do the real weather, so it's just random. A neat thing, though, here is this weather forecast class is right here. This is a C#, it's in a shared project. So this is a .NET standard shared project. What's great is, in a lot of API projects that I've written in the past, I have my model class written in C#, and then when I bind to it and do things with it on the client side, I have to rewrite that again in JavaScript or TypeScript. And then if I make a change, I have to keep updating in both places. So it's just another kind of thing. Oh, yeah, I need to do that. It's another thing to remember. In this case, we have this class, and it's referenced in this controller, and it's also referenced in this page, right? So it is referencing using the shared project, and then down here, it's just using this weather forecast class. So I think this is a compelling reason. In this case, it's a pretty simple class. but it is doing the Fahrenheit and Celsius conversion is in that class. So the point is, this is a .NET standard class. It could have all kinds of other things, right? It could have whatever logic I want, and it's great to be able to have this business object or a data object that is shared between server and client, and I can use it in both places. Cool? All right. So that is kind of the basic hello world stuff. We've looked first at compiling the code and running it in the browser, and then we've looked also at running it in, comparing it with a client and a server. Cool. And let's do some slides. Cool. So, what is in Blazor? So first of all, there is a component model. I showed you some very simple stuff with that survey prompt. We had survey prompt.cshtml, and then on the other page we said we referenced it by using a Razor reference to survey prompt. I mean, we're going to look a lot more at that because I think that is one of the strongest points of what Blazor has brought us. There's support for routing. So an interesting problem that you can run into with building front end and back end is you have to keep your routing straight. So your routes is navigating between the pages. When I click on here, you'll notice that the URL is changing, right? But it's actually not making a hit back to the server. So I have routes on the client and I have routes on the server, and we need to keep them set. And that is something I've run into with some single page app frameworks, and that's kind of just built in here. That's handled for me. And what else do we have? We have support for layouts. So these are your standard Razor layouts for your shared UI components. Dependency injection, I showed you that. We injected the HTTP client. So that standard kind of injection model that you have in Razor. JavaScript Interop. So that is pretty cool. Let's actually take a look at that. I have a simple sample here. So I guess we'll stop that. So, and I think this is a really key thing where, again, I find, or I think that the point of Razor is the whole kind of works best together. So you're not making a choice, I'm leaving the world of C#, HTML, JavaScript. It's more that I am finding the demo that I wrote. There it is. It's more that I can use C# when I want, and I can use JavaScript when I want, and if I want my C# code to call into a JavaScript library, I can do that. So let's dig into that. What I've done here is I've created a Blazor library. And this is an example. You didn't see that in File New Project. So how I actually added that was I installed those templates, and then I can go to, my desktop, and I can say .NET new Blazor lib, whatever, because I'm just showing you this as an example. And I should have given it an output directory, but it will create that sample project for me. Okay. Well, whatever, it's one of these. And I may have deleted it because I removed the SDK thing. But that's how I created that this morning, right? So here's my Blazor library. My Blazor library has a few things in it. First of all, it's got, here's my CSHTML. Here I've got an example. This is kind of the bootstrapper thing. So this is where C# is calling into the JavaScript. So it's using this JS runtime, and it's doing an invoke async, and it's calling into example JS functions show prompt, okay? And this is all set up for you if you do the new Blazor lib. So now let's look at that. This is using everyone's favorite JavaScript function, the prompt, right? So we're showing a message box and we're asking for input. So when I run this, So there's some JavaScript, and so it's a two-way call because, or it's a function, right? We're calling from C#. We're calling a function that's going to get data, and then it's going to pass that back into C#. And then, in order to use that in this project, I added a reference to it. So, if I look to my references, it's in there. Right, so Blazor lib is added. And then on the index page, I am calling into it. So what I've done here is I've added a button. And actually, my button doesn't have any text. So, right. So the button is using this onClick @ syntax to call into prompt. Prompt is making this call into this other library, right? So it's calling into that library, and I needed a using statement. So there's my using statement. Then example JS interop. It's just calling this method, right? So I get my standard IntelliSense, and right. So now let's run this. So the point here is that that is a standard JavaScript file. That JavaScript file could be anything. It could be a library that I like to, a JavaScript library that I like to use. So we can call both directions from C# into JavaScript and from JavaScript into C#. So here we do this. Click me, right? And I just typed hello. That's boring. Let's do type anything here, please. There. See, so that's the point there. We've got the two-way interop. Cool. And what else do we have? Auto build. So this is something where the building. I've had times where we do love the other front-end frameworks. We have had templates for a while with Angular and React. I have had times, though, where I've tried to demonstrate that, and part of, file new project, Angular is like NPM runs for half an hour to download the internet. And so I've had times where I've showed, demos of this, and I've had to say, well, trust me, it works. And then I've flopped over to Blazor, and I just run it, and it's significantly faster. So there are times, I do like JavaScript, but I feel like sometimes it's a little overcomplicated. And it's weird to me that I need Python and C++ build tools in order to run JavaScript and stuff. So I do like the fact that I know my .NET stuff is actually going to build. So there's that. Debugging, so there's support both in the, and let me see if I've got something running. There is, nope, I want this to be over here. So, and this can be a little funky to set up, so I'm not going to dig into it too much, but there is support for this in the browser, and then we're adding additional support for this in Visual Studio as well. Publishing, again, you don't have to set up this complicated build chain. That's great if your application needs Webpack or Grunt or Gulp or whatever. That's awesome. Keep using it, but you don't need to use that stuff in order to use Blazor. So that's kind of neat. I showed you app size trimming. So this is a full .NET runtime running in your browser under 1 megabyte. So that's pretty neat. There's fallback to ASM.js. So I did say that WebAssembly is a web standard. It's a new web standard. It does work on current versions of all major browsers, but for fallback to mobile or older browsers, there is support for ASM.js, which is neat. What else do I want to show you here? So currently, what I showed you here is we've got Blazor running inside the UI thread in the browser. What we're looking at in the future is actually using web workers, and so being able to run that using, again, modern web standards and using a web worker. All right, let's look at something else super crazy. So Electron is pretty neat as far as being able to. So the way Electron's another one of those amazing things that it's like crazy that it even works at all. So it's basically desktop applications. It's hosting Chromium, which is used to, for the Google Chrome browser. It's the open source kind of implementation of that. And then it's hosting Node, and it's actually running a browser and a server inside a desktop application, and doing all kinds of crazy magic to make it work. I went to a 1-hour presentation on this once about all the crazy stuff that they do to marshal things back and forth and special builds and all that, and it's pretty amazing. So here's an example. If I think I can do. So this is a. Yep, there it is. So this is running. Again, I love the counter, and here it is. Right. So this is a standard. This is Razor application, but this is a desktop app. Right? I could run other stuff in this. So this is you could do a cross-platform desktop application using Blazor. Now this is an experiment. It's out on GitHub. If you search for Blazor Electron Experiment, you'll find it. And again, it's interesting at least. I like it. I think it could be really cool, but. That was that. I'm rushing through. I've got a lot I want to show you. So there was Blazor and Electron. OK, server-side Blazor. This one left me scratching my head quite a bit when I first saw it, because I was like, wait, didn't we want to put the code on the client? Wasn't that the whole point? What are you doing? But this is actually really interesting. What we're doing here is we are running. There are times where you would want to actually host. You want all the kind of neat stuff that I showed you that Blazor brings you. Things like this component model and all those abilities, but maybe we want to not require that download to the browser. Maybe I don't want to send you a megabyte. Maybe there are other reasons why I don't want to send that down to the browser. It could also be that I have an application that's mostly standard HTML, but there's just small little bits of it that I want to light up. So the idea here is we're actually hosting Blazor on the server, and we're using SignalR and sending that down to the client. So here's an example with that. That is super easy to set up. That is that third template. And it actually turns out it's just 2 lines of code that are different. And so like the actual, as I run the application, again, it's that counter and the data and the weather data. So it's not going to look different. I guess I need to create the project, don't I? OK, so this is server side. So again, as I showed you, or told you, there's only 2 lines of code that have changed from the application we looked at before. So if we go in, first of all, there's this, not there, it's in here. So in the other ones, it just said use Blazor. And then there's one other line of code that's different in the kind of bootstrapping stuff, and I kind of glossed over that earlier. There's a few parts to how we bootstrap. When it loads up, there's a call to startup. Startup says add component app, and this app is defined here. And this app turns on routing and points it at the assembly. And so it actually that's how it's starting up. So the lines of code that are different for client and server are, there is this, where it says use Blazor startup. There's one line that's different there, and there's also in the, here there's this index.cshtml. This where it says blazor.server, it'll say blazor.webassembly. So the point with that is you could also develop an entire application using server-side Blazor, and then you could flip a switch and run that in the WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a new standard. Blazor, like some of the stuff Blazor is doing to run WebAssembly in the client is still new. That's part of why we're calling it an experiment. But the server-side stuff, we've done ASP.NET and .NET Core on the server for a while, and we're comfortable with that. So we've recently announced that we are shipping that as part of .NET Core 3. So the server-side Blazor that I'm showing you is going to be shipped early this next year with .NET Core 3. And so you could then develop something, run it in server-side Blazor if you want to be super safe, and then change 2 lines of code and flip over and run on the client instead. As a neat example, there is a project out here called Blazor Dual Mode. And so that is by Robin Sue. And I actually learned about it from Ed. I'm going to say his name wrong. Chardamo? I'll say it real fast. But he showed this on his Blazor Twitch stream. And so I thought that was really cool. So Blazor Dual Mode, you can do it. It's right there. So the neat thing with this is it actually, using a query string, allows flipping from client to server. And what Ed showed that was really cool was he wanted to debug something, and you can get client-side debugging to work with Chrome DevTools, but it's kind of crazy. Like you have to start Chrome using another command line argument, and it might crash, and like crazy stuff might happen. Or what this application is actually doing is allows setting a query string, and you can toggle client or server, potentially. So what's probably happening here is you need your startup to be server. So regardless of what you're running, you need to serve the stuff down to the client. So you will get errors if you have your client set to startup project because it's trying to run something it's running the wrong project. Okay. So this now, if I flip over to, here's the info on this, Blazor Dual Mode. So setting $mode equals server, adding that to the query string. So it actually toggles that over and it runs that in the server. So that's kind of a neat thing, and it's also a great trick if you want to be able to debug, use other things, and do all your kind of server-side debugging and stuff. You can do that. So neat little trick there. Cool. So that is server-side Blazor. Okay, the last thing I kind of want to cover here is components. So components are really important for client-side development, for front-end development. It's great that we're working with standard HTML, but there are a lot of times where you want a more kind of complex component. You want to be able to reuse stuff. You want to be able to build a component and reuse it maybe in multiple projects or something. And so that's kind of what we've done here. So actually, let me get off of this because it's going to confuse you if I show that. So that component model, when we built this, we looked at what are successful component models that are being used already. How are, where's web components going? How do Angular components work? How do React components work? And so they've been working really hard on building this component model. Honestly, I feel like that's something that we've been missing in the .NET web space for a while. There's a lot of things that are not webby and not good about web forms, but part of what we liked with them, part of what I liked is that I could actually get components and use them. And that's something that's been a little bit missing with ASP.NET MVC, right? And this ability to build kind of templated components and reuse and nest them and all that. So that is a big part of what's in Blazor. So that's actually what we're shipping as the server-side Blazor, is we're calling it Razor components. So that's kind of to distinguish that. It's actually a separate name. So there's Razor components for the server side, and then when we ship to the front end, that's Blazor. So cool. So some neat things about Blazor 060 is we added support for templated components. So we looked at a very simple component, which was that survey. Let's look at some more kind of complicated components. I like that dialogue. It's like, do you want to stop debugging? And it's like, no, just close it, but keep debugging. That sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to look at 2 different ones here. So there's Flight Finder, and then I'm also going to look at another secret demo, which is called, where are you? It's in here somewhere. First, we'll look at this. So Flight Finder, you can find the code for Flight Finder out on blazor.net. So in the Build Your First App tutorial, it's going to walk you through building a very simple first app. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it'll show you the link to downloading this that I'm going to show you, which is the Flight Finder. Okay, so let's run that. Okay, so this is going to allow me to book flights, as you would maybe guess. Okay, so here I can search. Notice when I click search, it grays out the area down below. I can sort these. Then I can add some to my short list and remove them and all that, right? So this is the kind of thing where you'll see some kind of standard things we're reusing. There's the template for the short list thing, and there's also this gray area at the bottom, graying that out. Here's a new thing that we've added here with the search car rentals, and this is reusing some similar things. So we are still searching, but instead we're doing some slightly different things to render different cars, right? And then notice on the side, I've got both my flights and my cars shown. So how does that all work? So let us look at those. So we have, first of all, in my components, I have all kinds of stuff. Here's one, this gray out zone. So this is very simple. Again, we're using standard CSS. So we're saying, we're binding to something, and then we're setting whether or not this gray out class is set. So there's this bool is grayed out. And then, based on that, we're injecting this child content, and we're wrapping it in a div that's gray. In the flight search, so again, we've got standard HTML, and then we've got this stuff at the bottom, and this is, again, this is making calls back to the server, and so we call on search, and there's actually like a few different modes to this. So the actual on search is implemented in something that's injected, and we'd have to dig around a bit here. But trust me, this stuff is there. So there's this is actually also, if you want to dig into components, this one is great because it has some more kind of in-depth stuff. For instance, it's maintaining state. That is something that's important when you're doing these client-server applications, is maintaining all that state. And so it has support for that in there. But the thing I wanted to show you, let me see. So shortlist here, we've got the shortlist flight item, and it is figuring out if it is which type. So this is actually a generic component, and it can work with either one. So how is all that stuff working? And really, the best kind of reference on how to dig into that is on this blog post right now, which is this Blazor experimental release, and it talks through that. And the things I wanted to show you there. So here, it's still kind of hard to see. Here we've got this type param, and we're able to set a generic. And then we can go through and bind to it, and we can use a row template. So that is really cool. So again, thinking of a templated component, here's the idea where I can say, if I'm binding to pets, then use this specific thing, right? I can also, then I can say something like, it's noisy out there. I can bind to multiple different types of things. So this is something I see as, really exciting in the future, is watching these components get built out further, watching things like vendors add support for components. You can find out more of those. There's on the site, there's a list of community resources, and there's also this awesome Blazor thing. Let me wrap up with, okay, so again, I think I covered all this. Here's where we're at. So Blazor 060 shipped. Blazor 070 is shipping very, very, very soon. It ships every month, so it's not really me giving away much of a surprise to say it's shipping very soon, but super, super soon. And then we're looking at Razor component shipping with .NET Core 3. You can find out more at blazor.net. Have a lot of fun with it. It's really lightweight and easy to use. So it's installing that extension and then just kind of play with it. I would love to talk to you more, field your questions, etc. And my time is up. Thank you very much.